Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Sargent number 28-10G04 LJ26D. This is a Sargent 10-line series lock. Let's take a closer look at it. We'll do a visual tour of the item, and we will then review all of the links below this video discussing it. You're of course going to get paperwork. That's going to be installation instructions and a template. We'll go over that. Sargent has been manufacturing locks for probably the late 19th century, certainly. And their name is utterly synonymous with locks. Okay, so let's get it all out of the box. We're going to take a look at what we've got here. Okay, so first of all, we've got the business end of this lock. This is an 04 function, and we're going to define that when we get to the catalog. This has a 6-pin LA keyway. LA is the typical Sargent keyway. It has its code literally written on the bow of the key. That's a direct code. Those are the cuts that are on that key. And it says LA right at the tip of my finger. That tells you that this is an LA keyway. Okay. If you looked down in the cylinder, that would help you understand. That would be the definition of the keyway. It's the broaching in the cylinder. So if you were to see a silhouette or a profile of the LA keyway in either Sargent's book or an aftermarket key blank manufacturer's book, it's as if you're looking down in the cylinder and not at the tip of the key in this orientation, but from the bow down into the cylinder. That's how this works with key blank identification. Large rosette. This is an LJ lever rose combination. Okay. I'm thinking I don't have 04 has got to be a it is a storeroom. Always rigid on the outside, always unlocked on the inside. You always need a key to retract the latch bolt. Okay, this does include a latch bolt. This is a labeled, it's listed and labeled. This would be appropriate and permissible for use on a fire-rated application because it does bear not only the fact that it's been tested to be compliant with a fire door test, it bears the evidence of such. Under the duress of a fire door inspection, this lock would be found to be compliant because the fact that it's been tested, the projection of the bolt, the fact that it has undergone the duress of a fire door test. Now let's get into the paperwork that is linked to down below this video. Now the first catalog we're going to get to is going to be the 10-line overview, and I like the format of the Sargent catalogs because they're pretty uniform. Page 1 is going to be an overview, etc. Architectural specifications will be listed somewhere that will allow you to review the lock. In an overview sort of sense, you're dealing with a lock that is going to be used on an 1 3/4 thick door that can adjust out to a 2-inch thick door. 1 3/8 doors can be done with probably thin door adapters. Now, why would 1 3/4 up to 2-inch be important? Well, this is a grade 1 lock, and we're going to talk about that more in a moment, which just for right now means it's heavy duty. It's been tested to 1 million cycles. But if you were to order a heavy-duty door, like a 14-gauge hollow metal door, you put a caliper on that, it's not going to be 1.75 thick. It's going to be more than that. You take a wood door and then turn it into a plastic laminate door, yeah, it's going to measure greater than 1.75. So the lock out of the box is going to tolerate that marginal greater thickness, but it needs to be able to, and all locks really will, but you can very easily get into door thicknesses that are legitimately 2-inch because of the specialty type construction of the door. So this lock will handle it. This lock is cool because you can do 4 back sets: 2 3/8, 2 3/4, 3 3/4, and 5-inch. 3 3/4 is somewhat unusual. It is unusual, but you do find those every once in a while. A 3 3/4, the 10 line can do it. Cylindrical housing, steel zinc dichromate finish. Cylindrical housing. That's going to be, you know, the internal construction of what we're dealing with. Steel components that I don't know that this is zinc dichromate. Zinc dichromate to me generally has a gold tone to it, but it is certainly zinc coated for corrosion resistance. Front, wrought brass and stainless steel. This is a reference to the face of the latch bolt. This is going to be, I would say that this is going to be brass. I know it's not going to be magnetic. Because this lock was ordered as 626 finish, if my choices on the front are wrought brass, wrought bronze, or stainless steel, it's going to be wrought brass. Strike, wrought brass, bronze, or stainless steel. This, I'm going to say this is a stainless steel strike, which is probably, that's awfully magnetic for stainless steel. Stainless steel would not have that much magnetism to it, even though I suppose that it's possible it could be, because stainless steel picks up magnetic properties. This is going to be, it's certainly not brass, that's for sure. This is going to be a quite complementary finish to your stainless, your satin nickel, your satin chrome. It's obviously got a high content of ferrous-based material in it. It is a 4 7/8 strike that comes with this lock. That's going to be considered standard. That's an ANSI strike. This is a 28 option, if you noted in the part number. That means that it's legitimately going to be a 4 7/8 strike, which would be typical. The 4 7/8 strike is going to be what you'd see in a hollow metal frame, and we call it 4 7/8 because guess what? It's 4 7/8. Overall width of the strike, about an inch and 7/8. But strikes are really defined as the center line of the screw hole to the edge of the lip. And strikes like this are generally about an inch and 5/16. You can order from Sargent shorter lips. You can order them longer as well, depending on your frame condition, the relationship of the frame to the wall, or what has been done to the wall to come back to the face of the frame. You might have material that's been applied to the face of the wall, so now that your inset, the inset of what the door effectively is greater, so you need an extended lip strike. You might have a weird application where you need a really short strike because they want to put latch guards over the door and the frame area to protect the bolt, but they don't want latch guards that have a recessed area for the lip of the strike to reside within, and they want something as flat as possible. So that can certainly be done. The 10-line locks are all non-handed with the exception of the G and the Y levers. You can take that and put it this way or this way, completely symmetrical. Heavy wrought brass and bronze roses. So this would be a wrought brass rose. Wrought is a reference to the process by which the scalp plate is manufactured. Wrought is understood to be something that is generally lower cost than doing a cast rose. Wall stops are very typically wrought or cast. This is wrought. It would be less expensive, certainly. Thinner material as well. High quality finished decorative hardware is going to be cast, is what it's going to be. Okay, that's what that looks like separated. That's your interior material. Now, this the latch is stainless steel. We know that because it's a 1/2-inch latch, and we can tell that just by looking at it. 1/2-inch latch throw. Okay. LA Keyway is standard. 6-pin brass cylinder. You can do really through this lock any cylinder pardon me, any keyway that Corbin can muster. And a walk down the path of what keyways does Corbin have is a lifelong pursuit. Needless to say, Sargent's been making keys and keyways for decades and decades and decades, and they have lots of keyway types, both typical garden variety like an LA keyway, all the way up to material that's reasonably protected, all the way to the stuff that's incredibly restricted and maybe specific for an individual type of client. A national laboratory might get their own keyway from Sargent sort of scenario. Now moving through the rest of the specifications, master keying can be done. Sargent is literally capable of doing any sort of any type of keying that would be required, as can we here. I wouldn't say we can do any keying that's required, but we can certainly assist with any sort of key work that you need locksmithing work done on the locks as well. Two nickel silver keys. Nickel silver is the material that the key blank is made of. Key blanks can be made of nickel silver, brass, aluminum, steel, stainless steel. Nickel silver is used, quite frankly, when the manufacturer wants to provide a higher strength, a stronger key blank. Nickel silver is simply stronger than brass. That's all there is to it. Finishes. Lots of finishes this can be done in. This is the 26D finish. They can do polished brass, satin brass, antique brass, satin bronze, oil rub bronze, powder coated oil rub bronze, so it's an equivalent, an antique bronze with a lacquer, satin nickel, polished nickel, black, satin chrome, polished chrome. I think that's about 12 options. This requires an ANSI, what we would call a modified 161. This will take a 161 prep. That means it's a 2 1/8 hole at a 2 3/4 backset with a 2 1/4 tall and an 1 1/8 wide preparation in the edge, except that it's modified for the holes at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Those holes are going to be mandatory to install because the amount of rotational force that are applied to levers, because you can kind of rotate it harder than you can a knob, these through bolt posts are going to keep the lock true in the preparation when you have a we'll look at the template, but that's probably a 5/16 hole, maybe 1/4 inch, maybe 5/16. When you've got those two holes on top of your 2 1/8, you can only rotate that so far before those through bolt holes are going to really stop it from moving at all. That's not going to rotate at all when it's installed, is the bottom line. It is a grade 1 lock. That means it's been tested to 1,000,000 cycles. I'd like to know what this was. I'd like to know how many cycles it survived when they pulled the plug on the testing machine. I bet you it was a lot more than 1,000,000 cycles. This is UL listed, US and Canadian standards for fire rated doors. If you're doing a double door application that requires a UL listed product, you have to order the 41 option because that's going to give you a latch bolt with a longer throw. It has been found that the longer throw latch bolt is mandatory for pairs of doors in order to keep those two doors in the secured position for the entire length of the 3-hour fire test. It is also UL 10C positive pressure compliant, and it is compliant with ADA requirements for barrier-free design. The lever design basically is barrier-free compliant for those with physical handicap when it comes to operating door locks. I'm not familiar with California code, but the L, J, and P levers conform with that California code. I would think that it must have everything to do with the general shape. L, J, and P, we'll look at the levers later and see if we can determine what's different about those three levers compared to everything else. They have a mention about hurricane code. Here in southern Florida, you don't sell a steel door unless it's rated for weather, windstorm, hurricane rated, etc. When you are doing a hurricane rated opening, you can't look at just the lock or just the hinge or just the flush bolt. You have to look at the entire opening. When you are doing the door and frame, you are going to pull from that manufacturer's approved products, lock sets, flush bolts, and then use a lock that's been tested and found compliant with that requirement. If you want to do Sargent locks, you're going to need to stick with Assa Abloy owned manufacturers of hollow metal. That's namely going to be Seco. Actually, in fact, in our website, if you go to the manufacturers page and find Seco, you will find documentation on their windstorm rated product, and you will see how the individual manufacturers' part numbers and locks are listed for use on those doors. So that's how you'll go about being compliant with hurricane code. You can also do a micro shield coating on this stuff, and you're going to find that on your chrome material. Micro shield is a coating that's applied to the trim to retard the growth of fungus, mildew, bacteria, things of that nature. Absolutely typical in a hospital sort of environment. If you're in a hospital and you see, if you really tried to take notice of what the satin chrome looked like, this is not micro shield, but micro shield has a blue tint to it. Makes it look severely like a deep blue kind of stainless steel. If it looks a little different than your standard satin chrome, it's probably antimicrobial coating. That's there, and you can read about that in the specifications. The next page in the product catalog goes on to talk about the Florida Building Code material, and you can review that. Just be mindful if you're dealing with hurricane code required doors or tornado required compliant doors, that is an all-in endeavor. Look at the testing procedures for the door and frame manufacturer. Select your hardware from what's possible. You're not going to be able to slap on easy set that you get at the home center onto one of those doors. Now there's an overview of the 10-line lock talking about its features and benefits. Solid cast levers that are through, the locks are through bolted. The door thickness we talked about earlier has the ability to run multiple key systems, is going to be a relatively easy to assemble lock set, and looking at the exploded drawing, I'm thinking this is super easy to install. Cycle test, we actually asked that earlier, exceeds 9 times of grade 1, so this obviously got to 9 million cycles before it failed. That's not too bad. A heavy application on a door and frame is easily going to be 3-4 million cycles within a 5-year period. And the point being 9 million cycles, yeah, when you're looking at a Sargent 10-line lock, you're buying into a lock set that's should go the distance. It should really be able to give you a substantial amount of serviceable life. Like all things that are manufactured, all things will fail eventually. And this gives you a good start in terms of what it can already handle. There's also going to be testing criteria that says how much torque you can apply to the lock itself before basically defeating the lock. It's 50% higher than the minimum requirement. Has a 7-year limited warranty. And you take that 7-year along with a 9 times grade 1 requirement, you've got a good lock. Convenience. It installs in 1 minute or less. Well, if your holes are drilled accurately, I'm going to be tempted to agree with that, because looking at the way that these screws are already captive, you're going to put this into the latch bolt's going to go in first. You're going to put that chassis in there. You're going to bring this sucker. The screws are already there. You're going to screw it together. You're going to throw your hub into the mix. I'm not sure, lever. We'll try to define what this part is called. We will define it. That's going to fit inside of here. You can see these chases that are cut. They're going to go into the milling profile on the inside of this unit. When I get that lined up, it fits in there. The point of all of that is you're going to have, and because it's not really, it's not installed, you're going to have a lot of surface area engaging the lever return springs in here. So you should really enjoy a very good long life of bringing that lever back to horizontal every single time. Quickly adapts to fit multiple through bolt positions. I guess what they're going to say to that is, yeah, I see what they mean. This lock ought to fit into other manufacturers' preps. So they've homogenized that preparation apparently. User-friendly packaging, user-friendly instructions, convenient installation diagram on the box. It's right there. If you can distill it down to being that simple, you know, you've done a good thing. Okay, the 7 line and the 10 line are drawn out there. You use the same box for 10 or 7 line. Fits a variety of door preparations with adaptable through bolt locations. Ah, I see what they mean. Yeah, sure. So what they're saying to us here is they'll be able to pop these through bolts out and run them into these other locations. Other manufacturers are not going to have their holes at 12 and 6. That's what they're talking about there. Most will be at 12 and 6, but not all of them. Now, solid feel, precise lever action. That'll be a result of the lever return springs inside of here. Slim rose design available. We'll go over the trims, the available levers and trims in a moment. Decorative levers. They can do the Coastal Series levers, the Gulfport and Yarmouth. So doing some work down here in condo buildings that have to be hurricane rated, using Seco doors and Sargent locks, we're able to toss a Coastal Series, a decorative lever, onto the lock. You've got hurricane code mandatory. Your options in terms of doors are somewhat limited in that regard, especially when you have an in-swing application. Here in Florida, I have relatives who come by and they grab the handle and immediately try to push the door in. And they say to me, why do your doors swing out? Hurricane code. An outswing door can handle that pressure pushing in a lot differently than an in-swing door. When you get into in-swing and hurricane code, you can still do stuff, but you're really dealing with a hollow metal door and frame application. And it's your condo. And here in this part of Florida, it can be a $3 million condo. You don't want to put an LJ trim on there, do you? You might love the lever. I might like something a little more decorative. So that's nice where they can bring you that Gulfport and Yarmouth. If you get into the Sargent website, Coastal Series, you can see those levers. This catalog will show it to you as well. Levers are solid one-piece cast construction, except the J lever. This is certainly not one-piece cast. This is going to be tubular. That's going to be a piece of material that's been inserted into here. That's a hollow lever. It's going to be done that way for cost purposes is the bottom line. It's a very flexible lock. Has those multiple backsets mentioned. Lots of levers, rose designs, finishes, 21 different functions, which we'll touch on briefly. You can get into security options such as torques and spanner screws as well, and functions that will help us contend with our ever-evolving world of classroom security. Sargent is at the, is part of Assa Abloy, and they are a leader in the development of hardware as in terms of the evolution of how our society goes. Appropriate for use in high-end applications in terms of volume usage, hospitals, retail, educational, etc. You're not going to see 10-line locks in a home. That's the bottom line. Now, when we get into the lever designs, you're going to see the different levers. I'm not going to call them all out, but you can certainly view them. You're going to have your J lever is what this is. Forgive me, I had said earlier the levers are one piece except the J lever. Yeah, okay. So they're all, cast except this one lever. This is the J. So what we have here is an LJ trim, right? Yep. An L rose, of which you can do an L or a G rose. The difference there is the projection. The G rose is really skinny. This is 5/8 thick. The G rose is much more petite. Then you see your different levers that are there, and all the dimensions are given. Now, they had talked about certain levers being California code compliant. L, J, and P are compliant levers. L, J, and P. Oh, okay. Well, you can easily pick up why that's the case, because they have the L, the J, and the P are the only levers that make a seriously measurable return back to the face of the door. Your Gulfport, your Yarmouth, your B lever, they don't return back to the face of the door like this. California code obviously requires this severe return back to the face of the door, and probably stopping a half of an inch short of the face of the door, which you have to be mindful now. You're dealing with a really big lock, right? You're dealing with a lever return that is severely close to the face of the door. They can kind of eyeball that on the camera. I suppose that's, yeah, it's about a half of an inch. Well, if you're at 2 3/4 backset to the center of the lock, it's going to bring you all the way out to about 7 3/4 inch from the edge of the door to this portion here. What if you have got a light kit on your door, a full glass light kit? Well, be mindful of that. You're going to have to use really narrow trim on your light kit, or flush trim. So be mindful of the positioning of how far this large grade 1 lever is going to stick out. There's nothing worse than ordering custom doors and frames with full glass lights in them and 10-line LJ trim. No easy way to solve that when handicap compliance is required. So be mindful of that. Now the functions. This is an 04 function. So the way Sargent works is you have lots of prefixes, and you can stack those prefixes. This is a 28. The only thing that's important there is it gives us this strike rather than the 2 3/4 T strike. But it's a 10-line lock, so we got 28-10. That's easy. It's a G lock, and a G lock means that it's going to have, you've got G and you've got U. You've got guarded and unguarded. The bottom line is, if you've got a keyed function, or if you have a function that requires a deadlocking latch, like an exit lock would, that's a G lock. So if you know in the part number, I don't remember what 04 is. Ask me a Schlage part number, and I'm pretty good, because that was the first lock line that I learned. But most Sargent, I know 37 is a classroom. I do know 04 is a storeroom. But I have to think about what their other functions are or look them up. If you've got a G and a part number, it's probably got a key. So be mindful of that. I mean, that's just an easy way to know if you're dealing with keyed locks. And then you're going to have, trim, design, finish after that, special keying requirements. Suffice it to say, Sargent can provide you with functions ad infinitum on their cylindrical lock, which is what this is. Now, they did say that there were 21 functions. You could easily have a requirement for a function that you cannot get in a cylindrical lock, and that's where the world of mortise locks comes in, because when it comes to mortise locks, the bottom line is they have a lot more real estate than this chassis, okay, to concoct parts to give you the functionality that you need. Not a lot of room to come up with 50 different functions of locks only inside of here. So that's where mortise locks will come in. They do have that classroom intruder lock. That is going to basically give you the ability to lock that outside lever with a key on the inside. Okay, so you can lock it from the inside with a key on the you can lock the exterior lever via key on the interior lever. The interior lever is always operable. You have to have a key to lock that outside lever. So students can't lock that door. You'd need a key to do it. They get into electromechanical options. You can certainly do fail-safe and fail-secure ability to control locks. Very typical, very common. I'm sure they can run a REX switch, a request-to-exit switch, through that as well. I do not see that mentioned. Oh yeah, you can definitely do it. For sure you can do a request to exit switch on the lock. That's one of those prefixes that we'll talk about shortly. Power supply is going to be suggested for use when you're electrifying their hardware, along with McKinney hinges that are going to come with quick connect adapters for doing so. Assa Abloy has companies that will give you every piece that you need, whether it be the door and the frame, or the door closer, or the lock, or the hinge, or the ability to electrify all that material. You'll be able to stay under one umbrella. The advantage of doing so is that you can order your Electrolinks prepped hinges to have quick connectors on them, making life easy so you're not twisting wire, is the bottom line. They do have miscellaneous parts that are there. They have that typical strike. If you don't specify 28 dash, you're going to get a typical 2 3/4 strike. It's probably not going to be what you want. Be sure to order a 28 dash. When we scroll through there, now we're going to start looking at different options on latch bolts. Now, reviewing the latch bolts when you're speccing hardware is really important because not only the backset, but you have to be mindful of the throw that you're dealing with. Why that could come into play with, you're doing a 10G04, that's a storeroom lock. There might be an electric strike involved. If you're going to buy an electric strike, you have to know the projection of the latch to make sure you order the right electric strike. And then, again, if you're doing a pair of doors that are 3-hour rated, you've got to have that specialty 3/4 projection strike. You can put that 3/4 projection strike on a non-rated door, but if you're going to do an electric strike, you got to order an electric strike that'll take a 3/4 latch. It's also important to know the face of the latch bolt. This is 1 1/8. That's typical. But you could have doors that are prepped with a 1-inch wide faceplate, so be mindful to catch that. You're not going to find a 1-inch wide in a 2 3/4 back set. And by the way, nowhere on here measures 2 3/4. This is a 2 3/4 latch. Because cylindrical locks are measured from the edge of the door to the center of the hole. That's the back set. 2 3/4 latches are generally about a 2-inch overall length. 2 3/8, suffice it to say, would be 3/8 shorter. They do make extensions to take your typical latch bolt and get to those other lengths. So I don't really know why you would order an extension unless you already had a 2 3/8 latch bolt. What I'm trying to say is the 3 3/4 and the 5-inch extensions are extension pieces onto a 2 3/8 latch bolt. If you already had 2 3/8 and you needed to do a longer back set, 3 3/4 or 5-inch, you would do it via an extension, or you would just buy the latch bolt that's necessary. I do not see any radius corner options at all on these locks. Then you're going to get into the different cylinders. You can do conventional cylinder. You can do Sargent's full-size, Sargent's interchangeable core. They'll also prep these to take small format. Your Best, your Falcon, your Arrow, your clones of all of that stuff. They do offer small format material. They can run competitor Keyways into their locks. I've never tried to install a composite or generic cylinder like maybe by Kaba Ilko or some other, GMS or someone else who makes that material, into this lever lock. It's possible that it will work. It's also possible that it won't. So if you wanted to put a quickset keyway through this, I suppose that you may have a chance to be able to do that. Then, of course, they get into their degree protected sort of keyway stuff, their XC material, their signature material. That's all going to be degrees of key control over the patented, regulated access to key blanks, the parts to allow people to rekey them, etc. Now, they will also take I bet you that they will take those composite cylinders, because they offer a variant of this lock that will take a Schlage conventional core or a Primus core. So why does Sargent do that? Well, They'd love to sell you their locks. It's just that you are a large pharmaceutical company. Name one. It could be that you have an existing Primus system. That's not going to change. You're building a new building. The owner says, well, I don't necessarily need to have Schlage locks on this job. We're looking to shave some money. This is completely hypothetical, but we got to keep our Schlage cylinders. That's going to be the same logic when it comes to small format interchangeable core because of the ubiquitous nature of small format, especially in military government installations. You'll find best cylinders literally everywhere. And it really is a case where all manufacturers are really going great distances to permit other people's cylinders to work in them, where it was you couldn't put anybody into anything, and then you had these manufacturers taking small format. Now you've got best permitting other people's cylinders to work in their locks. So it's an evolving scenario. The page after that, we're going to get into lots of mechanical options. And in terms of prefixes, and you can read that material. If you're doing electrification, a request to exit might be a good idea to have, also known as you order it, be sure not to miss it. Request to exit could be simply, request to exit doesn't mean you're saying, hey, can I exit? It basically means when you hit that inside lever, there's going to be a micro switch. That's going to tell something else, do something, change state. A typical application is you've got a lever lock with an electromagnetic lock. You're going to have a keypad to get in. That's easy. Well, that wouldn't be a great scenario. You could have a request to exit could be a scenario by which you are exiting and you need to be able to report to a central station that says that lever's just been rotated. That would be a reason. Request to exit you would find in exit devices, where you're going to hit that exit device, which is communicated back to a electromagnetic lock. But generally you'll find those to be just touch bars and don't have an actual latching mechanism, but sometimes you will see that as well. A wrought box strike would be nice to have if you're putting this into a frame that does not have a mortar guard, like a drywall, a hollow metal drywall frame will not have mortar guards behind them. You might want a box strike. Tactile warning is actually interesting because there is code that says if you have a client, about 6 months ago we sold them a couple hundred locks, and a lot of them were stairwell locks, and the client said, I need your help. The inspector's telling me I have to have tactile warning on the stairwells. Okay. Yeah, no, there's code that says you have to have tactile warning on the stairwells. So be mindful that you may need that, and that Sargent can handle that. Cylinder options, we talked about that. Needless to say, they can probably do almost everything. Then you have really how to go about building your part number. And you're going to refer in the document above there to be able to piece the entire part number together. It's always really nice to give the factory the hand, even though you don't need it. I like to give the factory the hand and the degree of opening because you never know. It's handy to look at a hardware set and have all the information, is why that's handy. It's also, I think, a mark of professionalism, to be honest, to have all of the information there. The finishes are there listed. Architectural specifications are there. You might be someone who partially makes a living or completely makes a living by advising other people on what to look for in terms of hardware. You could be an architectural hardware consultant that works with an architect's office. They're building the building, but that doesn't mean they're hardware experts. So you could take that architectural specification and bring that into the specification requirements to say, architect firm, this is the lock that I think you want. Put this in your specs. Your owner, we've discussed with your owner, this sounds like what they want. When you send it out to bid, this is what everybody's going to work from, those specifications. That exhausts the entire product brochure that's there. A couple of other documents that are going to be there are going to be a sell sheet. It's just like a one-page product brochure. They're going to be able to talk about in another document their lock brochure is also going to be there, and that will allow you to go over the 7 line, the 10 line, and the 11 line, which all relate to cylindrical lever locks. A little bit of history on Sargent, I bet, is in there as well. Maybe not. There should be. We'll talk about Sargent history in a moment. You can quickly go over the 3 different locks from that document, the 7, 10, and 11 line. There is also a parts manual that's there. To me, it's a hallmark of a lock worthy of consideration for a small or large purchase when they publish a parts diagram. Here's the bottom line. I'm going to spend $1 million on door hardware. I'm building this epic building, or a school, or maybe just an office that has 10 doors on it. I liken it to owning a vending machine business. I'm going to want to be able to get parts, and I'm going to be able to want to install those parts to continue to get useful service out of it. So if I had a vending machine company, I'd want one coin changer, one bill, taker, so that I could interchange all of those. If I was going to spend all kinds of money on locks and closers, I'd want to be able to order just the part I need. And the fact that they'll publish that and give it to you, is crucial. You could just have a broken lever. Someone could come and cut that in half. It's happened. I've had people walk in here. Someone literally put a saw on my lever thinking they were going to get in by sawing the lever in half. So parts diagram is also there. Now, you're not going to get every single part that you need every single time because you might not be able to buy the retracting hub only from this lock, but you're going to be able to get part of the way there. So that's a hallmark of a lock line worthy of consideration. Then there's a template or there's a template that shows you what the preparation needs to look like for this lock. That is a metal door sort of preparation that they're showing you for all of their functions. It basically shows you the 2 1/8 inch hole, the backset as determined. Be mindful of your preparation because you could do 1 inch as well. Before you go drilling stuff, make sure that that's all going to work. Now this is interesting in the sense that this is not a floating front on this lock. This latch plate does not float at all to account for a beveled edge door. I don't think you're going to have a lot of problem with a beveled edge door, but they do have a floating front version of that as well. Shows you where the through bolt holes are. Then finally, there's really just the installation instructions. And I do agree they kind of... this is really all that you kind of need when you get down to what it actually takes to install this lock. And lock installation instructions are pretty generic. Here's the exploded parts. Here's the bill of materials of what you're going to get. Check it all. Here's how to prep the door for the lock. And then here's how you install the lock on the door. Because it's not like a closer where you have to adjust things after you get it installed. So understanding the terminology of what all the pieces are called is important. This, I would never have guessed, is called a spacer bushing. Okay. It's helpful to know that that's a spacer bushing, and that's what it's called. So all those pieces are listed there, and that's really helpful. And it does show, in essence, how they all at least stack together. Then again, your preparation. The latch bolt's always going to go in first on locks, on cylindrical locks, because the chassis and its retracting hub need to mate with the back of the latch bolt. That's going to stay engaged fairly well if you're off center, maybe by 3/8 of an inch. A downside of cylindrical locks is they occasionally become disengaged, and that's especially if you've done if you have gone to a client's space and drilled a hole in a steel door for them. you don't have the proper, when steel doors are manufactured, they have a can on the inside of it that doesn't let that latch bolt move very much on you. It's all put together to keep everything in alignment, but when you do it yourself, you run the risk of that latch bolt getting disengaged from the retracting hub. So that's nice that it has a range, is what I was testing there. You might have to adjust the door thickness on what you're working on. It's highly unlikely that you will, but you may have to. Those are graduated points that they show here of where you're going to line up your chassis for the door thickness. You can see that it's preset at 1 3/4 according to the installation instructions. You're probably not going to change that at all. The latch bolt goes in, then your exterior side goes in, and then you'll make any adjustments for thickness that you would need. You will have to remove the lever from the outside. That's super simple. I don't have a, one's included. So this little piece of hemmed rolled over wire is going to be the cylinder removal tool. What do they call it? Part 13, push pin. Okay, yeah, push pin, that makes sense. If it was a fire extinguisher, I'd call it a pull pin. So that's going to go in. You're going to rotate that key clockwise, generally will work. Then you're going to be able to take your push pin, push it into the hole, and that will retract the retainer that's inside of there, the spring-loaded retainer that's here. Then you're going to be able to pull your exterior spacer bushing out and make any adjustments that you're going to need for... Actually, you're not going to do any of that. You're just going to rotate this. That's how that's going to work. Now, no, that spacer bushing will certainly have to come out. Which means your rosette's going to come off. That spacer bushing is going to have to come out so that you can rotate that. And that's how you're going to then draw your chassis to the proper line, is what you're going to do. But that spacer bushing will certainly come out. Don't know if the push pin will work to help me get that out. I doubt that it will. Let's take a closer look at that. The installation instructions don't say how to remove the spacer bushing, but just grabbing onto the tang there, grabbing onto this portion, you can kind of just work its way out. At least it was a moment ago for me. There it is. You'll be able to work that out. Make any door thickness adjustment necessary by rotating that. I'm going to put that right back the way that we found it. Okay. I like the spacer bushing idea because it really positively engages the rotation of the lever and the springs that are inside of that housing. Since we've got this out, let's take a closer look at the cylinder. Being a genuine Sargent cylinder, it's going to be of certainly very good quality. Tail pieces on lever locks are generally vertical. I think they're exclusively vertical. Tail pieces on knob locks are horizontal. The reason that that's vertical is because, well, when that's installed in the lever, it's laid on its side, so it's horizontal. That's how that works. Now, what would make it difficult to use a composite cylinder is you'll notice that the face of the cylinder plug is markedly smaller than the cylinder housing. Okay, so that might be a challenge to you to get that to work. I can tell you that I have personally reamed these holes larger, and I can also tell you that I have personally ground down the circumference of the head of a cylinder as well to make them fit. Not something that you want to do at all, but sometimes that sort of procedure does fall within the purview of a locksmith trying to service the client. Let's take a look at how this rose goes back on. These little indentations here just need to ride here, and there's one on each side, and then you just turn that clockwise and it'll lock in position. Now I can see that we've made a mistake. The retainer here, the spring-loaded retainer, and the spacer bushing need to be exactly opposite each other. And I reinstalled it without doing that. So that spacer bushing's got to come off. And get positioned correctly for it to work in the lock. Because now I have a lot of grease on my hands. There we go. Okay, we've coaxed that out. So what happened was, when I was placing it back on the lock, before I pushed it all the way down, I rotated it, and that was the fatal mistake. But now I've got that retainer that's going to go in the back of the lever and the spring-loaded retainer in alignment with each other. Okay, then my rose goes back on. Okay. Then my lever will go on. And generally what you'll find is a small amount of clockwise rotation is required. And the reason that that's the case is, and the reason that the tailpiece is oriented in the way in which it is because down inside of the chassis, there are two triangle pinpoints there. The tailpiece can't go straight in. It's got to be turned a little bit to get past that. It also has to be turned a little bit because when the tailpiece is straight on, it is not... You see how the retainer is spring-loaded? Well, the retainer is like a big C-clip, and the tailpiece is like this. You can't push the retainer down, and that's why you can't just pop the outside lever off on almost every lock, but not every, without having the key, or without having a working key, or picking it open, or impressioning the lock open to make a key. You got to get that turned so that you've got enough room to push the spring-loaded retainer in. That's why those work the way they work. And most every manufacturer, operates on the same type of principle of that sort of concept. A hallmark of a good quality lock is that they go together. Do not take for granted the fact that locks always work that way, because they don't always go together very well, is just simply the bottom line. Because they simply do not. Now, let's wrap up this video. You get this lock put back together. If you do take the outside lever off, which you probably won't have to at all, give a good tug on it. You want to make sure that it's fully seated. You need to securely see that pin, the retaining pin, back in the slot that's grooved on the inside of the lever. And you can actually see evidence right there of that grooving for that retaining pin that's there. I can tell you, it goes back very easily. There's pushing 100 years of development on cylindrical locks, and it goes together fairly easy. Test for preparation before closing the door. You don't want to lock yourself out. Goes on to talk about cylinder removal should you need to. Don't believe that you'll have to. Putting in other cylinders are discussed there. Interchangeable core, construction core is discussed. Other functions are discussed, because you could simply have a single dummy. And then the U functions, which could be a dummy, or it could be simply a full set of dummies, are there. And that that really wraps up everything as it pertains to the reassembly of this lock. Once you get this on, this is going to go in. These two big pieces of metal are going to fit inside of these slots, top and bottom. Yeah, you do need to have your screwdriver to get those two screws started in those holes, but that'll be easy. All this is basically just going to come together on you. You'll get that put down. Don't use drills. Use hand tools. Wear gloves and use hand tools. That's my advice, because you can over torque the hardware very easily, and then it's not going to operate reliably or predictably. Is the bottom line. Going to put the rosette back on, just so that we can then put the lever, the interior, the inside lever on. Doesn't sit flat necessarily. Where that retaining ring is, got to put it right where that is. There's only one way that can go together. Pop that on. I can tell that it's on. You're going to experience a little different operation without the latch bolt. Okay. And the fact that it's not installed on the door. There you go. That's your lock. That's your Sargent 10 line lock. Nice quality lock. What's a hallmark for me of selecting locks is, how is the technical support department at the factory? Are they good? Are their parts manuals published? Do they give you a wide array of available functions? Because if you're going to do a simple building like a movie theater, probably not a lot to deal with. But if you're going to talk about a hospital, you've got to be able to deploy the hardware so that it's all compatible, and do it in such a way that you can have a single manufacturer solve all of the problems. And I believe that Sargent is certainly part of it. What I like most about Sargent, they do have good technical support. I have spoken to their department on more than one occasion. What makes me most interested about Sargent, however, is going to be the fact that I enjoy the lineage and the history of the company, because they have a lineage and a history. They are among the founding companies when it comes to door hardware in the United States. There is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page, in fact, where you can review not only all of the Sargent hardware that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website. And there is certainly going to be in that manufacturer's page links to archival catalogs. Let's take a look and see currently what sort of vintage catalogs we have. Okay, I've got a Sargent catalog going back to 1877, 1888, 1901, the early 19th century. And as I get more, I put more. I kind of collect, or, it's a hobby of mine. And the reason it's a hobby of mine is it's helpful to understand the hardware that you work on and sell if you understand where it came from. I realize it sounds, I guess, just generic and cliche. But what I've come to learn as a result of studying where locks have come from, nothing new's been done. Manufacturing processes have improved, certainly. What it takes to make a lock is certainly less work. When it comes to the development of high security cylinders, sure, that has evolved. When it comes to anything that has to deal with electrification, making the lock smart, communicate with other locks, that's certainly evolved. But when it comes to the design of the rose or the lever and the basic construction of the lock, it's beautiful to be able to go back in time and look at these old catalogs and say, my goodness, the essence of what the lock is really hasn't changed at all. Dealing with something from the late 19th century will be inherently different than dealing with with locks from the 1920s and 30s. But if you look at Sargent mortise locks today and Sargent mortise locks from 80 years ago, what I think you might say to yourself is, gosh, if I had ordered my mortise lock 80 years ago, I wouldn't have had 5 options. I would have had 50 options. And that's generally what I find. A lot more options were available once upon a time. The downside of these old archival catalogs is that they're pretty epic in size in terms of the file size. So when you get to that 1877 catalog, you'll have to be a bit tolerant of the fact that it's not just going to be like flipping pages or in a modern PDF viewer. But as I look at that 1877 catalog that I have open on my screen, you're going to find some really cool hinges that they have. Apparently Sargent was into a lot of rolling door hardware, surface bolts. I wouldn't be surprised if we found some closing devices somewhere. Oh, mortise locks. Beautiful, beautiful mortise locks are listed there. Don't know if any of them are going to have a mortise cylinder function in 1877, or if it's all lever locks or warded locks. Yeah, I don't see anything cylindrical from back then. I see what I would call a bit key. You might know it as a bit key, or you might know it as a skeleton key. Nothing cylindrical, even though Yale had, by that time, certainly invented the pin tumbler cylinder. I don't see any of pin tumbler locks, a modern mortise cylinder, in any of these locks. But it's neat to be able to look at that stuff and say, golly gee, how gorgeous were those designs. Builder's hardware they have there as well. Hooks, things of that nature. I just scrolled past sash locks, sash lifts. I just scrolled past a cabin hook. A cabin hook is literally a piece of hardware that you can buy today. And it's, you know what? It's called a cabin hook. I sold one about a month ago. So neat to be able to go back in time and look at all this, at this interesting hardware. I don't really know that it would have a lot of interest to most people unless you dealt with hardware. Or if you just had a general interest in maybe metalworking from that era. I like getting further into the book because it will then start to show us these rim locks that are there that work on skeleton keys. But they're really warded locks is what they're called, because when a key enters a warded lock case and it has the ward cuts in the proper location, it will bypass the wards because they're not obstructed, allowing you to operate the lock. I don't see any here that are lever tumbler locks, which is a different conversation altogether. Oh yeah, no, there are lever tumbler locks here. There absolutely are. Part number 904 is a lever tumbler lock. You're talking about lock design construction that was developed in the 18th century, if not earlier. So really fascinating to be able to look at these locks. As far as I'm concerned, it's another reason to consider a company like Sargent, because they have a clearly established lineage that is pushing 150 years old. I don't know when Sargent got their start, but it's obviously before 1877. They've got a catalog that is 1,000 pages long, so I'd imagine they didn't start in 1876. Any questions on the Sargent 10-line lock? Sorry I got the cue from the conductor to wrap up my acceptance speech. So if there's any questions on anything Sargent, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.